Welcome to the Chris Spangle Show, where you guessed it, I'm Chris Spangle, and we are talking today about civic education. Wait, please don't turn off the show. Civics is, I think it's one of those topics that like your grandma would talk about, but civility and civics is actually really exciting. Okay, civility is not Alexander Hudson in her book, Soul of Civility. A friend of mine, we go to church together. It's a great book. I highly recommend it. And she talks about civility is not the idea that you are just being kind to people and holding your tongue and everybody's just getting along and it's kumbaya. Civility is actually, how can you have strong disagreements with each other and still remain friends? How can you say what you think and have enough trust between each other to say what you think? And my guest today, Alejandro Ramos, I'm so sorry, Alejandro Ramos is talking about his framework to bring civic education into classrooms, and he talks about what that means, what that would look like. You know, what are the 4 points that he is really talking about in his framework? Because we really have to get back to this, right? Because the conversations, I'm in a weird place in my career, right? So I started out in talk radio, went to manage the Libertarian Party of Indiana, which put some relationships into motion in my life that in the second half of my career have blossomed into this crazy space where locally, like, I was the guy who was just like, yeah, let's just be populist right libertarian guy. Now I'm the podcast producer for the elites in town. It's the best way to put it. And so you're in contact with the people, like, you know, in 2019, I was toting around at Leaders and Legends running the podcast. And here's the guy talking about the $10 million project that you put a press release out saying we shouldn't do this. But then you hear his logic and you go, that kind of makes sense. Right. So I think I've become more deliberative in the way that I think about, public policy and what kind of city are we building. It's been very informative to come into contact with people that are doing things where you might disagree, but you hear their rationality. That's totally separate. That's totally different than the conversation you see online. Like if you just live online, it's a totally different world. So we talk a little bit about why civics education could be good for America. Maybe we need to come up with a different name for it, but I think you will find this conversation to be really interesting, worth your time for sure. And we talk a little bit about immigration. He's a second generation immigrant. He would be the person that if we ended birthright citizenship would no longer be a citizen. You listen to this podcast and tell me, does this guy care about America or not? I think you will love it. But civics at its heart, as he defines it, is like, what do we love about America and what are we willing to fight for? So it's a great conversation that you can hear right after these words. Alejandro, thanks so much for joining me here on the podcast.
Thank you so much, Chris. It's a pleasure to be here.
So tell us a little bit about your interest in civics. So I read your article, which I mentioned up at the top, why civic education must be at the forefront of reform. Why did you write the article?
Well, I think that currently we're in a place in our country that it's very hard to have conversations with people who may differ than you just a tiny little bit, and people that are on the opposite ends of the political spectrum. And I think that this all begins with having a good foundation of civic knowledge to be able to combat these other issues that we're having in society, the polarization, the inability to have courageous dialogue, and sort of the susceptibility that people have now to mis and disinformation. I think that if we had a stronger civics education curriculum in different states, that students would then flourish to be informed and engaged citizens in society.
So you start with Gen Z's turnout decline in the election, which I didn't know. Maybe you can give us that number. But the question is something that I've noticed. And I am fairly plugged into what I would call the establishment here in Indianapolis now.
Yeah.
It's sort of a weird thing where I went from the head of the Libertarian Party to being the podcast producer for all these podcasters that talk to all the important people here in town. And what I'm consistently surprised by is the conversation on social media never reflects the conversation that is happening on these podcasts that I produce amongst the people who are making decisions. Like, and I think there's just like no connection. Like, we're having a totally different conversation in centers of power versus social media channels. So, how does that disconnect that you've identified play out in turnout and real world civic engagement?
Sure. So in 2020, the youth engagement rate and the voter rate, uh, was at 50%. In the 2024 election, it had dropped to 42%. So the turnout dropped by 8 points, by 8 percentage points, which is huge from one election to the other. I think what we're seeing in social media, it's this weird thing that people, the younger generation is very vocal on social media, and they're very quick to anything happens, whether it's on their college campus or local communities, or on the world stage, a natural disaster, a terrorist attack, to make very quick posts. And, there's great things about that. There's also issues with that. The great thing is that we're connected now like we've never been before. I could connect with my family members that live in Cuba or in Spain or wherever people are located in an instant. But it poses the issue of the proliferation of mis and disinformation. So I think that's one component. I think the second component is that youth is disillusioned. They feel that there's no one that represents them. I think that people believe that the youth vote is a monolith. They're always going to vote on the right, or rather on the left. But we saw that in this past election, that wasn't the case. And I think that young people are a lot more willing to, depending the space that you're in, to think about different perspectives and to see things in a different way, if they're put in a setting where everyone feels the same. And by feeling the same, I mean being willing to have those open conversations and courageous dialogue.
Why do you think this performative activism is so prevalent? What makes it so attractive,
It's
especially in younger circles?
It's easy. It's all you have to do is press two buttons. You click the share button, you click post on my story, and it's up on your story on Instagram. And I think that in the world that we're living in, that we are, and I think that this is, although there's so many pluses to these devices, they are really destroying the fabric of America and what it means for us to be people. Forget about, individual countries, citizens having a love and a desire to want to give back to their country. But I think that all this technology has created sort of a disconnect people to people, that people are no longer willing to engage. You sit at a dining room table, and instead of people having a conversation, everyone's delved into their phone. So I think that the component of it being so easy and that people are chronically online allows them to sort of dive in and just say, okay, I'm going to share this, I'm going to like that. But when it comes to actually going outside the sphere and engaging in the public forum, it's a very different situation.
So, I just read a really interesting article by Ben Smith on Semaphore about group chats and how group chats are essentially what happened is COVID. A lot of the censorship on platforms during COVID drove a lot of these figures into group chats on Signal together, and tech giants, and it was organized by one guy who runs the A16Z podcast. He put all these like-minded, like Chris Rufo and all these different, and Ben Shapiro and all these different figures on the right in group chats with people on the left and tech people, and it just is really interesting. You should definitely read it because it sort of follows along these lines. But you know, it I've been really thinking about the responsibility of tech companies and censorship, and like, where's that line? Because you don't want blatant misinformation out there, but also like banning me and my Facebook group for a joke about bleach during the COVID thing was ridiculous.
Yeah.
And there's these real world consequences, like the tech bros moving right is a direct result of direct backlash to COVID censorship. So when you're talking about tech companies and their role in supporting accurate civic discourse, where's that line for you?
Well, I think for me personally, I think it's a very fine line, like you just mentioned. and I think it could be something very dangerous that, I believe wholeheartedly in the First Amendment. And I think that start going down a very dangerous path when we start censoring people. We're seeing it on college campuses. We're seeing it across the country that people feel censored and then they react and act in other ways that, could potentially be a lot more dangerous, for communities and whatnot. So I think that something, as blatant um misinformation of saying, I don't know, um, the bleach situation to make it, but there's a difference, right? Because there's a joke, right? I don't know how many people did the same thing during the pandemic. They would post a joke, and next thing you know, they're like, oh, well, I'm off of Facebook for a month. I'm in Facebook jail. So I think that there's the algorithm, and this is my issue with technology. It's not a person, right? It just finds words and it says, oh, we're banning you because you use the hot words that you're not supposed to use. And people could be being sarcastic, they could be making a joke, or even someone could be saying, if you were to post something outrageous on your page, if I don't agree with it, I'm just going to scroll past it, right? I'm not going to call Facebook and be like, hey, Chris posted this crazy thing and I disagree with it. You have to take it down. Just because you disagree with someone doesn't mean that it's not real. And I think that that's also an issue that we're having in this space of media literacy and mis and disinformation, that the average person says, "Oh, well, I disagree with you, so you have to be wrong." Um, or, that we think that, in many cases, that the right, is not media literate and they have no idea what you're talking about. Actually, they're just because the left and the right consumes different media doesn't mean that they're not media literate and that they're not able to consume information and then be critical about it. So I think that there's a fine line, and this would take us, being locked up in a room and having conversations with a group of people for hours and hours on end. But I think that it's a fine line, and it becomes very tricky when you start making these broad decisions of, oh, well, if you include this, you're going to, we're getting rid of you. So I think that there needs to be open discussion on this and seeing sort of where it falls and having the input of all the stakeholders involved.
Yeah, I think that's why civics are so important because it drives people into in-person relationships with each other
Absolutely.
and actually gets you working together on problems in your community. That's why democracy, a Republican democracy. I know we're not a democracy, okay? Don't email me. But it's why it's so important. But let's jump back to civics, okay? Because I think that's this is sort of a popular thing that gets said. It's civics are important. Civic education needs to be taught. But how do you define it? When you say civics, what do you mean?
So for me, when I think of civics, I think of sort of four pillars, and this is something that the institute is working on a project to roll out at the university level and high schools. But when I think of civics, I think of four things. The first is having the foundational knowledge of our country, right? Knowing the Constitution, knowing the Bill of Rights, having that aspect. The second is being media literate, right? Being able to consume information, not just say, oh, wow, I read an article. That's great. Reading that article and saying, I want to question this and I want to dive in deeper and find other sources. The third component is being able to have what I like to call courageous dialogue. That just because you are, in a university classroom and you know that your professor might be, a liberal professor, that you shouldn't feel censored to not be able to say, "Hi, I actually believe something differently." But then also for that professor to say, "Okay, let me give you a platform," right? Because that's what universities are for, and you should be able to do this not only in the classroom but anywhere. Is to be able to have these conversations, this dialogue that leads to not, hatred, but, unity, to be able to say, thank you for sharing your perspective. While I may disagree, you have the right to share that perspective. And fourth, is the component of being involved in your community, right? Because there's no point, at least in my opinion, to have all this knowledge and to have the skills and to be able to have conversations, is if then you can't take those three other areas and say, well, I'm going to go into my community and I want to make a positive impact. And however way, you see that yourself, it might look differently person to person, but being able to go back and give back, I think, is so incredibly important. But I think for me, that's what encapsulates civics in our country.
So you're right that like in schools, this should be taught like math and science. So how do you see that playing out? How would that roll out?
Sure. So I think, like you said, I think that it needs to be a base thing that gets taught to everyone. I think that the really surprising thing to me, and quite shocking actually, is that in 2022, only 22% of eighth graders were civic literate, which, I can't even put into words how I feel about that. Every time I read that statistic out loud, I'm just floored because I don't know how to describe how disappointing.
It's sort of like those Jimmy Kimmel type videos where it's man on the street videos of, what does the Constitution mean? They're like, I think that's like a donkey that, yeah, it's like, what?
Exactly. So it's, though that it's so low. So I think that we need to incorporate this in, K through 12 education. And it's not something that should be, oh, let's bring everyone together once a year and you're going to have a 1 hour presentation from some random person that showed up to the school and is going to talk to you about how important it is to go out and vote when that person is running in the election, right? Your local county executive or whoever it may be. It needs to be a sustained effort that students are hearing about constantly, right? The same way they hear about biology and chemistry and, algebra and, literature, civics needs to be a component of everything because, again, it's not, and I think civics has been politicized, right? That, the right thinks it's one thing, the left thinks it's one thing. It's just a thing, right? It's not a left thing, it's not a right thing. And we need to be able to see that, and understand too that in some areas it may be biased based on professors, because that's, without a doubt happening, at the university level, but also in at the high school level, and to be able to come at it from a perspective of it's a community thing. We need parents to be involved. We need students to be involved with the decision process, and with faculty members as well.
This seems really difficult to execute. And you talk about the civics education becoming politicized. I think we've seen that with the 16 what's the New York Times project?
1619 project is
1619 project, excuse me. Well, now we got to have the 1776 project. So let's get Larry Yarn from Hillsdale to write our version. In Oklahoma, now you're being taught about, it's now being written to the curriculum that the 2020 election was stolen from Donald Trump, right? Your version of civics may be different from my version of civics and how the government ought to function. I mean, how do you build protections in your curriculum to deal with that, to diffuse that?
Sure. So for me, it's a very slow process, Chris. It's working, starting in a local municipal level, and slowly working your way out to the state, then doing the same thing state to state to state, and being able to have these conversations and, closing the door behind you and say, let's get real, right? Whether it's the legislators, whether it's the Department of Education in that state, whether it's Board of Ed members or the superintendent, to be able to say, this is the baseline, right? Uh, we need students to be able to drive these scores up, right? Everyone needs to know what the three branches of government are, what the Constitution says, what the Bill of Rights says. Those are, I think, non-negotiables, right? The most basic levels. Then to be able to understand who is responsible for what and at what level, and who represents you, right? There's a lot of people that you ask them, like you said, man on the street interviews, that it's like, oh, who are your two senators? Oh, Elizabeth Warren and Ted Cruz. And I'm like, where the heck and they're in New Jersey. And I'm like, where the heck did you pull that from?
Right.
So I think it's those base things. And I think if we get back to civics being the basics, it is very hard for someone either on the left or on the right to say this isn't true. Because if you tell me, I tell you that the three branches are the executive, the judicial, and the legislative, and you tell me, well, it's not true, I only believe in two branches of government, I'm like, well, maybe you need to go through the curriculum all over again because there's something obviously wrong, with the way that you're thinking about this.
Yeah, I think that's the hard part is that, you learn. I mean, I'm old enough. You're not. I'm 41. You seem like you're what? Your 20s?
Yeah.
Okay. We used to get shown the bill. I'm just a bill, from
I remember that. I was shown that video too.
right. But your generation's version is a meme of that with someone handing cash to the bill and how something becomes a law.
Yeah.
I think I've become a little disillusioned, and that's why I'm excited for next year being the 250th of the Declaration.
Yeah.
It's reinvigorated in me in terms of my reading and what I'm thinking about and the conversations I'm having with people about what it means to be an American and what do those values and principles mean? Because I think we have gotten so far away from. I think it's just a little disillusioning, and I think we're a little too negative online, and I think it's part of our, we're reinforcing stereotypes about our country that may not even be true if you actually get out in the country.
Yeah.
Um, but what it means to be an American, what are American values? What do these principles mean? Can we actually achieve this? Because the things that we're taught in school around civics feel like they're not true because we're just hit kind of what you're talking about. We're getting online. Um, do you see you have the citizen empowerment framework. Do you see next year kind of being a great year in terms of other people coming to this conclusion that I'm coming to? Like, what is an American? What does it mean to be an American? If we are an idea, then what is that?
Yeah. Well, I think so. I think that, and I have high hopes, even though I do feel disillusioned as well. And this is the space that I work in, that I have high hopes that, with what's going on at all levels of government currently, that people are craving information, right? And not just information from scrolling on TikTok and seeing, a cute infographic on Instagram, but to really say, I want to learn and I want to get at these things. But to sort of understand these broad policy issues or whatever it is that I'm passionate about, I have to understand the basics. So I think that with the 250th anniversary of our country coming up, I think that this is a perfect opportunity. And I think that we're very lucky at the Ramos Research Institute that we'll be launching the Citizenship Empowerment Framework next year. And hopefully making this a thing that's ingrained in people, right? It's not just, you're not going through the system and coming out as a robot that goes and becomes a cog in the machine, but you're someone who is, an individual. You're an American and you're proud to be an American, understanding that this country has flaws like every country, because no country is perfect, just like no person is perfect. But to be able to understand that and then say, I want to make a change in my community, for the better. You see that there's an issue, whether it's as small as, oh my God, there's these potholes that are driving me crazy in town. And the town doesn't have funding to pave them over. Coming together as a neighborhood society to patch that up, seeing that students, after school, because there's not enough funding to have after school programs, getting involved. What is the community doing for each other? And it goes back to this issue with technology, that we're so sort of hyper focused on all of our technology, that I think that we, again, have forgotten how to be people, how to engage in the public forum, and in public spaces. All throughout history, all civilizations have had a space that everyone could come together. And slowly we're sort of losing the space. And I think that having that space where, we could have these conversations and we're able to do more than just click a like button. I think to me, that's what it means to be an American, to have your neighborhood come together, whether it's as small scale as just the street that you live on, or your entire community, and really think of ways of how we're going to improve society, and do good by everyone.
So, what is the citizenship empowerment framework?
So the framework, is basically how I described civics to be before. The framework has these four pillars: the foundational documents, the media literacy, the courageous dialogue, and then the community engagement. And this is something that we're working on. We're hoping that it'll be finalized, to sort of have out for review in the next month. And the framework is, we're hoping that it will be implemented at the college level, either through a certificate program, or in just a course that students take, that would be required and mandatory, that you start off and you sort of build. It's like stepping stones. You need the foundations, then you need the media literacy. You learn how to have courageous dialogue through debates, or simulations in class. And then the final component of class is getting out of the community, right? Stop coming into the classroom. Go out and find a problem that you see in our community, whether you're in an inner city or whether you're in rural Indiana. Find an issue that your community is passionate about or that they're struggling with, and come together as a class or as a group with a few students and say, we're going to think of ideas that we could help tackle this, right? We might not be able to snap our fingers and have it solved tomorrow, but let's start thinking about how we could make an impact on society and on community. So that's the hope for the framework. We're hoping to implement it At the high school level as well. We're already in partnership and talking to a few different school districts to make that happen. So we're positive and we're hopeful, and we're seeing that people are interested. Right, it's not like something that we're going out on tour on, and people are like, "Oh, we want nothing to do with this." Which is what I thought honestly was going to happen. That we were going to go out and people were going to be like, "Oh, civics. Who wants to talk about?"
No, there's a real hunger. There's a guy, I need to have him on, Jeff Rell up in Carmel, who is working on civics, and he invited Lexi Hudson, who was a Young Voices contributor back at one point and wrote a book called The Soul of Civility. Maybe you've heard of it. And she was invited to come speak to the people of Carmel, and 500 people showed up to hear about civics. And he's putting a whole framework together in his own community. I'm happy to connect you to, and to Lexi too, if you want. But there's a real hunger for how do we work on these problems locally without like the dementors. I mean, that's really sort of how it comes down. But so I think there's the will within a lot of people, but then there's also not much. I mean, this is one thing that concerns me, and I'd love your perspective on it. Political parties know where their voters are. They have dialed this in. Elections are about turnout. We know where the voters are. We don't want new voters showing up.
Yeah.
Because then that means that we can't predict how this election's going to go.
Yeah.
Have you faced any pushback from political establishments that don't want new voters showing up?
Well, I would say that's certainly the case. And, to a point you just made, I would love to connect with those two individuals because I think, the work that it sounds like the work that they're doing is incredible. Another thing that I'll mention before diving into your question is I think that, not I think, I know that people sort of tend to forget where the levels of government are, right? Of course, the president and the Senate and the House of Reps make huge decisions that impact our lives. But the things that affect our day to day lives, schooling, policing, transportation infrastructure, most of that is at the local level. It's with your mayor, it's with the county, it's with the state. Um, and I think people tend to forget that. So I think that if we brought it back to local communities, and like you said, we forget about all the noise that's happening out in space. I think we could get to a point where we are a lot less polarized, and we're a lot more focused on making positive change, increasing voter turnout and increasing the engagement that we're seeing in all aspects. In terms of pushback, we have seen it. I sent an early draft of the framework um, to two individuals, one on the Hill and another low level member that worked in Trump's first administration, people that I had worked on campaigns with. And they were like, "Ah, Alejandro, this is the most ridiculous thing ever. You've gone far to the left. What's wrong with you?" And then I said, "What?" So I go back into my document. I made one edit and I sent it back to them. I
Yeah.
changed critical thinking to patriotic thinking.
Oh, that's so funny.
And they
It's critical because of critical race theory. Is that become like a buzzword?
are making that connection, but it's not. It's just thinking critically, right?
Yeah.
And right away I sent it back to them. I said, "Oh, I made a few edits. Let me know what your thoughts are." Again, I changed one word. "Oh my God, this is the best thing I've ever seen, Alejandro. Why didn't you send us this the first time?" And I'm like, "Really?"
That's
Yep. So it's sad to see that these are people in government, they're staffers, that are making decisions because we all know staffers run offices. It's typically not the elected officials.
yeah.
And just by changing a single word, it made all of the difference. So I think that the establishment will definitely be a problem, at the local level, at the state level, and eventually, at the federal level, because people won't be happy. Like you mentioned, that there's new voters, that voters are informed. I think more so than voter turnout. I think when the voters are, literate civically and with media and all these things that will impact the way they vote, that's even scarier to politicians than the ability for people to mobilize and come out and vote.
So I don't. I'm happy to edit this out, but you told me off air that you're the son of immigrants, and I'd love to hear what America means to you through that lens. I've had a lot of folks on lately who are immigrants themselves. One of them from Cuba, one of them from Argentina, and I have loved those conversations because people who have immigrated to this country have, I think, a better understanding of what it means to be an American than many of us who are in our seventh generation. Um, what does being an American mean to you?
Yeah. So, as I mentioned off air, both of my parents are of Cuban descent. They both immigrated to this country, so I'm a first generation American. And I was instilled from a very young age this love for America because America gave us the opportunities that Cuba could have never given us. And I never forget my grandmother, who has now passed away. She always used to say, when you would ask her, "Where are you from?" She would say, "I'm American." And she would say with a smile on her face. And I'd never seen, someone be so happy and prideful about where they come from before. And that's how it was. It's I'm an American. And no, grandma, but you're Cuban, right? And she goes, no, no, I'm from Cuba, but I'm an American. And it was being able to, and she would always express, she would say, we have freedoms in this country that, we never had when Fidel came into power. My parents immigrated here for two very different reasons. My mother's family was very highly educated, very wealthy in Cuba, and my dad's side of the family, low education level and, farm workers. My father dropped out of the second grade to be able to work on a farm and help provide for his family. And then my grandfather on my mom's side of the family was a lawyer and accountant. So it's very, very different lives, and that they immigrated to this country for different reasons, but they both feel the same way, right? That they love America and that America gave them the opportunities to be able to be successful like they have been today. So for me, although I see the flaws that America has, as I mentioned earlier, every country has flaws, every person has flaws. There's nothing in this world that's perfect. But to me, that's what makes America perfect. Is its imperfections, right? There's growing pains, right? We're only 250 years old. It sounds like a long time, but when you think about it and you put it into the perspective of history, we're just a baby, right? So
China recently said that actually. They said, we're 5,000 years old. Trump's tariffs aren't going to scare us.
Yeah. So, so that to me is what makes America so special, is the ability for all of us to come from different places and to be here together and share, the stories of our ancestors, and the people that came from us not too long ago. And to me, that's what it means. It's a beautiful thing. It makes me really sad to see these days that people have become so hateful towards the United States. Because, and I've traveled, I've been very lucky that I've been able to travel the world. And every time I leave this country, no matter where I go, I come back and I say, wow, I'm happy to be home, because you see things in other countries that are really sad. Quite frankly, we were in Cuba not too long ago, and everyone's happy, right? Of course, they're upset with the way the government is functioning, but as humans, they are happy, and they live in an oppressive dictatorship. And yet, then you have people here in the United States who have everything, right? Of course, there's barriers for certain people, but we have everything, and that people are constantly and chronically complaining. Everything's rigged against me. Everything is terrible. No, go somewhere else. I'll send you to Cuba, to my homeland, for a week, and then let me know how it is. Come
Just
back.
go back and listen to my episode of Gabby Blanco, who immigrated from Cuba. And I mean, it was eye opening because you get this sense that, oh, well, Obama opened up Cuba and things are better there because Fidel's not in charge. And she disabused me of that notion in 45 minutes. I mean,
Absolutely.
yeah, I mean, that was, we had two superpowers. We had America and we had Russia. And, it wasn't Gorbachev. I think it was Yeltsin went and visited the grocery store in Houston and wept on the plane back going, "What have we done to our people?"
Yeah.
Because in their superpower, you didn't have the amount of choice. That's what I think just chaps my ass about these tariffs, right? And like,
Yeah.
no, you get 2 dolls instead of 30. It's like the president is not the person that gets to decide. This is not a Macy's and you are not general manager. Like, the fact that we have so many choices in our supermarkets and globalization is just this beautiful harmonization of people waking up every day to chase their passion. You have the freedom to wake up and write about civics. That would bore somebody else to tears. They love to build houses, right? Like,
Yeah.
You don't want to build a house, and they don't want to write about civics, and yet everybody gets to wake up to every day and chase their passion instead of doing the work that a robot can do, right? It's so I think that's why the tariff talk has been so grating on me and so fundamentally un-American in the way that
Yeah.
Lutnick and the president have talked about this, because free markets at the end of the day are fundamentally America, and I think birthright citizenship. I'd love to get your perspective on this, because it directly affects you. When someone tells me that someone who is born to immigrants, they're talking about illegal immigrants, but I don't think that we're making any kind of distinction. If you're here on asylum, you're illegal in the eyes of half the country, apparently.
Yeah.
But yeah, when you look at like the conversation on birthright citizenship being so personal to you, and some of these other fundamental American things like due process, I mean, how does that land with you? I'm
Well,
not trying to make this an F Trump
yeah.
type podcast. I'm talking about the bigger, broader principles of the conversation around some of this stuff.
Well, I think the conversations are quite disappointing, honestly. And, because of the way that people are having these conversations, I know that they don't have the civics background to understand.
Okay, yeah.
They don't understand, right? So it's all connected to civics, Chris. That, it's to me, it's disappointing that, we in a way have become so hateful and so reactionary and so quickly, right? I couldn't agree more with you on the tariffs, right? It's not up to the president to decide, whether you get one thing or you get 10 things. Um, and in terms of birthright and sort of the immigration rhetoric that's happening right now, my parents came to this country legally, I think that the issue that we're having right now in the United States, it's not a close the border and okay, let's move on. We need systemic reform. The immigration system, just like a lot of other systems in this country, are outdated. They need reform. They need to, in a way, be blown up and be built from scratch. Because they're not, built to have the numbers of people that were coming in to the United States right now. And, there's people that are coming here because they are actually fleeing something terrible. The notion that all immigrants are these terrible, drug dealers, rapists, I think it's sad to see, because at one point all of us were immigrants.
Right.
It doesn't matter, and there's been times in history that there was some sort of group that was treated like garbage. Right now, it just happens to be Hispanics, but before this, it was the Irish and then the Italians, right? So there have been waves of hatred for certain groups. They're like, oh, these dirty people are coming into my country. But at one point, it was all of us, right? All of our ancestors went through that at some point. And I think people are quick to forget that. And they don't have the historical knowledge to be like, well, I'm Italian. It wasn't that far long ago that my great great grandfather was treated like trash, had to take X, Y, and Z job because whatever. And then that's why we see certain individuals within society holding certain jobs just based on race and where they come from, is because they were sort of, when this whole hatred for them, they were sort of pigeonholed into. That's why, it's funny, the Irish, there's so many Irish in fire departments because they were give that, we want them to do that. So there's this broader conversation, I think, that needs to be had on really revamping a lot of the things that we have here in the United States. I'm not saying tear down the entire United States and the Constitution and everything, but looking at the systems that we have in place. And I think that Trump is well positioned to do that. He still has another 3 years. I think he needs to focus on what's important and what people elected him to do. And it's to reform these systems and to make sure that we're benefiting Americans, right? That we're putting America first. But at the same time, we are destabilizing our economy, the world economy, and shutting down our borders completely to everyone.
Yeah, I found it also interesting in my conversations, and you tell me I'm not trying to lead the witness, but there is, in the conversations with the first and second generation immigrants that I've had from young voices, because so many young voices contributors seem to be first or second generation immigrants because they love liberty.
Yeah.
They love the principles of America. They're not down with, they're not on the Trump train. but they're definitely not on the progressive train.
Yeah.
Right? Like Gabby, I think in her case, she's like, look, I escaped communism. I haven't, there was almost a reflexive aversion to anything left leaning while also being skeptical of some of Trump's more banana republic-y. Like that's sort of my read. Like, does that land with you too? I mean, does that sort of describe why you're writing for a libertarian? You're connected to Young Voices, which is a libertarian outlet.
Absolutely. I think that, and I think you describe it perfectly. It's we do have sort of this because we hear stories, right? And we see some of the things, or at least I see, some of the things that the left is doing. But then at the same time, right now, I'm like, you can't really distinguish some of the far left and the far right individually. Yes, right?
Yeah.
I'm like, we've gone so around that the circle is starting at the top again, and I'm like, how the heck did this happen? So I do think so. My family we're all Republicans. But it's a lot of us are disappointed to see what's happening right now. And I think,
On which points? Because what one contributor was like, "Look, our my community gets hit by crime worse than anybody else. I want the worst of these folks deported. Like, I'm not." And I think most Americans feel that way too. Like, they just deported a guy who was molesting girls. Good. Yeah. I mean, actually, I'd prefer him to be in jail, not sent back to molest kids in El Salvador or wherever.
exactly. Well, I think in a case like that, I think that there are cases, that people need to be deported, absolutely, or people need to be put in jail. I would definitely not make the case, for either open borders or for, a crazy Wild West society, like some people do want. But I do think that we need to, have due process. And really, if I were Trump, and I'm not, but if I were, in my first
You're gonna need better hair.
yeah, I need to have a little flip over. Um, yeah, in the first administration, or even in this term, the thing I would say regarding all these immigrants is I would take the national stage, right in the Oval Office, have all these cameras pointed at me and say, anyone that is in this country illegally, we are giving you a path to citizenship. If you have paid your taxes, you have not committed a crime, and you have integrated yourself into society. Anyone that has committed a crime, we're deporting you. People that are no good and will give nothing back to society, goodbye. But then at the same time, while we're giving a path for citizenship for all these people, we are locking down the border. We are going to build border security. We're going to reform all of our immigration laws to be, to present day, to 2025. But that's what we're going to do. And that I think that would be a marvelous thing, is that these people that fear that they're going to be deported and all they're doing is working, a simple job, trying to do better for their kids, than life was for them, to be able to have the opportunity to stay here in the United States, and to contribute. A lot of these individuals, they're churchgoers, or they're part of civic organizations, and they don't just live in their apartment and go to work and then come back and hide, all day. They are involved with their community. So why wouldn't we want someone like that to stay here? And to increase tax revenue, because then you become a legal citizen and your job is on the books. You're paying more taxes and contributing to society, in the economic way as well. So I think that there's a lot that in this system of immigration needs to be reformed. And then these individuals, sort of come into society. They feel like they do love America because America has provided them an opportunity. And maybe we could change these other aspects that we've talked about today, that, are feeling pain points and pressure points, and bringing them back to what we've discussed.
Yeah, I worked in talk radio in 2004 to 2008. I was also college Republicans chair at my college in 2004. And I almost got impeached because I said I agreed with Bush's path to citizenship plan. I think the failure of the GOP and Democrats to pass any kind of like work visa system, path to citizenship, like common sense immigration reform. Like we're having an argument around immigration that is deport everyone or keep everyone. And like that's the wrong argument, right? Like recognize that this is a labor market that people want to be in.
Yeah.
and they're willing to break the law to get here. And by the further one way we go, we've created coyote slavery and separated families, and we've created wage slavery in the United States. And I don't think it's everybody who is here legally is a wage slave. I think that's also gotten out of whack. But like our fundamental lack of saying, yeah, people do want to be here, and we need to make it easier to let people in, keep track of them, deport people who are not. Like, there's just this whole common, like everything else, there's just this whole common sense middle that if we could just get some civics into the conversation to bring it back, then yeah, it'd be great.
But I
Well,
think
go ahead.
the
The issue
follow-up
of it, and we'll wrap
is
up.
just really quickly, is that's the issue, right? It's that we're seeing here in the United States right now. It's that it's either has to be this or it has to be this, right? And but most of the people are the 80% in the middle, and they just want common sense reform that's going to be good for them and their families.
If you're not for a wall and total deportation and end of birthright citizenship, you're for open borders.
Yeah.
Well, no, that's not where most of us are.
Exactly.
Um, yeah. So, how can people support your work? We've got about 1,000 people listening. If every one of those people took your framework and put it into action in some way, it could have a great impact. So, how can we help support your work?
So, you could visit us on our website, ramosresearchinstitute.org. I would love to hear from people. That's, I think, my favorite part of having this institute is when I publish an op-ed and I get the random person that sends me an email and says, "Hi, I really enjoyed this. Let's have a conversation." I'm like, I would love that. And, whether we go back and forth an email or we set up a Zoom call or a phone call, it's a beautiful thing to be able to have these conversations and hear from people all over the country. I would love to be able to, and maybe one day I'll join you again on the show, Chris, once we've rolled out the framework and talk about how it could be implemented, and how we're looking for, because we are currently actively looking for partners to partner with us to implement this, whether it's in a local high school, whether it's in colleges, or whether it's in any other community that people feel, well, maybe my job could use this. We are really open and willing to having these conversations and seeing everywhere that this could be implemented. We're willing to go there and do that.
All right, great. The website's in the show notes, so check the description for the podcast or the YouTube video and check it out there. You can get the link there. Alejandro, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you so much, Chris. I truly appreciate it.
And thank you for joining me here on the program. We are so excited that you're here. And the best way you can support us on Patreon by going to wearelibertarians.com or Substack. Look me up, chrisspangle.com. Or you can share the podcast. It's super easy. Just send this episode to a friend and say, hey, I think you'll like this podcast. It's common sense. These guys made sense. And then you can explain what civics is to them. Because believe me, your friend needs it. 100% of the people you know, if you're listening to this show, 100% of the people you know are listening, need civics education and media literacy. I promise you. All right. Thanks so much for joining us here on The Chris Spangle Show.